Okay, so what this video is about is learning how to factor. Of course, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, we already know how to factor. Yeah, we have been through this a few times. First thing, remember, we always factor out the GCF. Definitely have to do that. Always looking for that, if there is one. The next thing we want to do is look for those special cases, and that was, the difference of two squares, the perfect square trinomials, or the cube things. You remember those guys? All right, the other things was the cubes. The a cubed minus the b cubed, and then the a cubed plus the b cubed. So the question now says, okay, well, what if it's none of that stuff? Like there's no special cases. And that's what this video is going to address. So the first one I'm going to look at is if a is equal to 1. All right? So if a is equal to 1, for instance, I have x squared minus 6x minus 7. So a few things I want you to just remember from previous multiplying binomials is that when you set something into a factored form, remember the outer and the inner will always make up the value of the b term, which is the middle term. So that outer and the inner. But the outer and the inner really are factors of your first term, right? They both have factors of your first term and factors of your last term, okay? So factors of your first term are going to fill where the f's are, and factors of the last term are going to fill where those l's are, okay? And of course, when you multiply it all out, that middle term, that outer product, like we just said, the outer FL and the inner FL are going to make up that negative 6x. So when I set this up, I'm like really just, it's a thought process. Factors of that first term are x and x, okay? There's no other factors of that. Factors of 7 are actually just 1 and 7. Now the kicker is that I needed to multiply to get me a negative 7, but then I need to add to get a negative 6. So it's almost like you're kind of figuring out a puzzle here. I need to multiply them together. That's going to get a negative 7. So one has to be negative, one has to be positive. But when I add them, I need to get a negative 6. So it makes sense, I hope, that the 7 would have to get the negative and the 1 would have to get the positive. And that's how I'm going to get that negative 6 in the middle. Okay? So if I have something like this, x squared plus 8x minus 9. Okay, so let's say I have that. So again, factors of my last term are going to make up the backs. Factors of my first term have to make up the fronts. So x and x sit there. Factors of 9, now look, I've got 1 and 9. I also have 3 and 3. Okay? Well, I need an 8, though. I need them to add to get the middle. Okay, remember, the middle term is made up by the sum of the first and last and the last and first. So I need to get a positive 8. Well, if that's the case, then my 9 has to be positive and my 1 has to be negative. And that's the only way I'm going to get a positive 8, because remember, outer and inner have to make up the 8. Now, I can't just use any two numbers. I can't just use 6 and 2 because that makes 8. You have to have factors of the last term that fill in that last part. So let's just look at one more of these. So let's say I have a minus 5x and a plus 6, okay? So now, here we go. I need factors of my first term, which of course are x and x. But factors of 6, now remember I have 1 and 6, but I also have 2 and 3. I need them to add to get a negative 5x. All right? So the last term is going to tell you whether they have to add or subtract. That's one thing. But remember, they multiply together to get the 6, which both of these do. I'm not saying they don't. But I need them to combine to get a negative 5. Well, the only ones that are going to add to get me a negative 5 are going to be 2 and 3. So I need a negative 2 here and a negative 3 here. All right? Definitely think about that one. You might want to pause it and just kind of reprocess that. I know 6 and 1 will make a 5. It would make a negative 5, but they're not going to multiply to get positive 6 and add to get negative 5. Okay? Here, I'll just do one more of those because I think it's pretty important. Okay, so let's say I have x squared plus 7x plus 12. So, of course, 12. We have 1 and 12. We have 2 and 6. And we have 3 and 4. So look at all these pairs. 1 and 12, yeah, they they multiply to get 12, but they don't add to get 7, so I can't use those. Look at 2 and 6. 2 and 6 definitely multiply to get 12, but they don't add to get 7. If this middle term was 8, then I would have my factors, but it's not 8, so it's not that. So then, of course, I have 3 and 4. Yes, 3 and 4 will multiply to get a positive 12, and they will add to get a positive 7. So I set it up, and I get a plus 3 and a plus 4. Now, this is what I was just talking about in class the other day. Check it out. I have this sum of terms, and I was able to turn it into a product of factors. How crazy is that? Very. All right, sounds good. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's 3 examples, and I want you to pause the video, and I want you to try them on your own, okay? So definitely pause it. Don't be like, oh, wait a minute, let me just keep playing, okay? Pause the video, and then try them, and then come back and check them. Sound good? All right, pause. Okay, so now you're back. So I'm really hopeful that you did pause this. So let's check and see if you got the answers. So the first thing we do is fill in the factors of the x's. And notice I used -2 and -1 because that makes a -3, but then also multiplies to get a positive 2. So check out the next one. Okay. So I have an x plus 4 and an x minus 1 because 4 times -1 is -4. Positive 4 and -1 combine to get the 3. This last one, right? I have a -5 and a positive 2 because they multiply to get -10, but then they also add to get me -3. Okay, so now the next question should be, okay, so what if it's not an a equaling 1? All right. So the next ones look like this. If I'm trying to factor, let's say 5x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay? Now my a is not 1. And these are definitely a little bit more challenging. There's 2 ways you can look at this. Okay? One way, you can do what I call factoring by grouping. It's not just me that calls that. Everybody calls it that. And basically, you're going to multiply your first term and your last term together. And that's going to get you a -15x squared. Now, look at factors of -15x squared that are going to combine to get you a -2. So factors of 15x squared, you know, are 5x and 3x. To make a -2, the 5 would have to be negative and the 3 would have to be positive. So when I rewrite this problem, my 5x squared stays, but this middle term, I rewrite using those factors. And then from there, I factor the first 2 terms by grouping. So I group the first 2 terms together, and I say, hey, what's common? Well, 5x is common. I'm left with x minus 1. Group your last 2 terms together. Again, hey, what's common? A 3. You're left with x minus 1. Now check it out. What do I have in both of these? An x minus 1. That pops out, and you're left with 5x plus 3. And that's how you would factor 5x squared minus 2x minus 3. So again, you multiply your first term and your last term. Then you look at factors of this term, -15x squared, that combine, that add to get you -2x. Well, -5x and a positive 3x will add to get you the -2. And then you factor by grouping. Group the first 2 together, do a little hey, group the last 2 together, another little hey, and then whatever's left over, hopefully it's the same thing, otherwise you did it wrong, pops out, and then you're literally left with a 5x and a 3. Okay? Feel free to pause it and rewind it if you have to. Let's look at another one. So let's say we have 3x squared minus 10x minus 8. So again, 3x squared times -8 gives me a -24x squared, right? 24 has a lot of factors. I get it. Well, not a lot, but a good amount. But you're looking for the factors that are going to combine to get you -10x. So, of course, that's going to be a -12x and a positive 2x. right? Because negative 12 plus 2 makes negative 10. Negative 12 times 2 makes negative 24x squared. Now, you rewrite the 3x squared, but the middle term gets replaced with these two numbers, negative 12x and a positive 2x. Leave some room, too. Don't be cramming everything in there. And now, factor by grouping. Group the first two together. Do a little hey. Gives me a 3x. You're left with x minus 4. Group the last two together. Do a little hey. Gives me x minus 4. Now, when I factor out the x minus 4, because that is in both of these, x minus 4 pops out, and then I'm left with 3x plus 2. Okay? So again, this is called the factoring by grouping method. All right? Like I said, feel free to pause it, redo it if you have to. It's no big deal. Nobody's timing you. All right? This all comes back to that whole factoring by grouping. And just make sure you understand why it works, right? If I have 4ax minus 3ab, and I was trying to factor the a, I would say a comes out, I'm left with 4x minus 3b. True? If I have 15x squared y minus 3x squared z, remember, we always look for that GCF. GCF is a 3x squared, and then you're left with a 5y minus a z. True? All right? So that's why it's working like this. Okay? So basically, remember, you multiply those two, pop it out. Okay? All right, let's try one more. Okay? So let's say we have 7x squared minus 10x minus 8. Okay? So here we go, right? Multiply 7x squared times negative 8. And what do we get? Good job. Negative 56x squared. Now you're looking at factors of 56 that make a 10. Factors of 56 that make 10. So 8 and 7, of course, always pop up. That's not going to work, though. Does anybody remember our 4 and 14? I think that makes 56, doesn't it? Yes, it does. But I need it to be a negative 10. So 14 has to be negative, and the 4 has to be positive. So then when I write them in there, I have 7x squared plus 4x minus 14x minus 8. Group the first two together, do a little hey, x pops out, you're left with 7x plus 4. Group the last two together, do a little hey, 2 pops out, and you're left with 7x plus 4. And notice I took a negative 2 out. Usually a good rule of thumb is that if that third term there is negative, factor the negative out. So now I have 7x plus 4 in both of these. Yay, us. I'm left with x minus 2. Yahoo, you. Sound good? All right, I'm going to throw up a few problems for homework. I want you to try them and bring them to class, okay, on the next screen. All right, so I want you to try these for homework. One, this is a simple one, I hope. X squared minus 9x minus 10. 2, x squared plus 9x minus 10. 3, 4x squared minus 16x plus 15. Number 4, 7x squared plus 10x minus 8. Now that's different than the one we just did, right? Because this time it's a plus 10x and then a minus 8, okay? And then, of course, I want you to try this one. 4x squared minus 32x minus 36. And remember, the first thing you must always do in all of these is always check for the GCF first. And then break it down. All right. I will see you in class.